Hello, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome to Design Details here at Music Effect Design, where we demystify the marching arts. We're your hosts. I'm Jordan Pittner, a visual designer, music educator out of Phoenix, Arizona.
And my name is Mike Kruger. I'm a composer, educator, arranger out of Cleveland, Ohio.
And I'm Holly Paxton. I am a color guard instructor and music educator based out of Phoenix, Arizona.
You know, Mike, when you said composer educator, I got a little distracted thinking about how that works on multiple levels. You're a composer, educator, but you're also a composer educator.
I'm also
interesting.
Beautiful. I got my beauty cup going on. So I've got my beauty cup going on tonight, guys. So, yeah, I know it's true. I get it composed. And like, that's part of my art is composing and arranging. But when I teach music, I also teach composition. Yeah. So yeah, it's very, very true.
I don't know. It was the way your flow was so smooth. You said I'm a composer educator. I was like,
I'm a composer educator.
Just.
It was real good.
I'm not a composer or educator though. I only compose and educate on that. I don't actually play.
You just teach the theory of composition.
Yeah, just teach it. Yeah.
You just write some notes. Come on, people.
They're good.
I think there's other people here. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a couple weeks since we had a full-time show. We're super happy to be back. Today we're talking about digging deeper for visual excellence. All right. When we talk about digging deeper for visual excellence, we're talking about what it means to get beyond the place where you're just done with a show. Right.
Yeah, it's the next step after learning those dots, or like not all the way after you're done learning, but that step of making it go from, hey, the shapes are there, can we make it look real good?
Right. Shapes.
Yeah, old school.
Yeah.
And also not thinking about my shapes for color guard are usually just arcs. Those are usual shapes.
Let's spend just a minute here at the beginning talking about guard and talking about music for just a moment, because when I say digging deeper in the visual side, that kind of means something specific to me. But for people who are watching who are music educators or, we're all over the spectrum here, right? What are some of your priorities, the two of you, when you think about kind of digging deeper to that next level of performance excellence with your students?
Well, for me, a lot of people say like point A to point B, right? But I really think it's like point A to point D or point E or point F. And what I mean by that is like point A is where you begin and point F is where you end, right? The season. But there's a lot of like benchmarks and areas and goals that you can achieve in between. So like for me, the big thing is understanding how do you break down what goals you want to achieve while being realistic with rehearsrsal time,
right,
and also being realistic in like what your group can achieve. So like if I want a perfect thing, if point F is the perfect thing and I start at point A, like where's point B, C, and D and E, right? Like where am I really trying to get and how do I get them to that level? So like there's ensemble timing, there's feet timing, there's accuracy of the drill, there's intervals, all of those things. But like, do those all happen at once, or do they break down at various segments to get the perfect picture? For me, that's one of the areas I actually struggle the most with. So I'm really excited to talk about it more tonight.
Cool.
Yeah, in color guard world, I'm a big fan of making things clean, and this process of making things go from A to F, and like how do you get this to be as perfect as it can be? I really like the way the color guard is sort of that intersection of music and the drill and the staging and the visual, because the pathways that they have to take are a big part of the learning of their show. Like if they have to move in the show, their choreography doesn't work if you practice it only standing still. There's a lot of cleaning that has to go into it in the process of doing the drill and rehearsing the drill, because the choreography clean standing still is different than it also being clean while it's on the move. And I know that we're going to have an MED episode about cleaning choreography at some point in the future. So keep an eye out for that. We'll talk a lot more about color guards and things too.
You know, Holly, you made me think of something right then, and thinking about it was, I think the other element is where do you know to combine, like say you have a set, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you go from set to set. And say you want to do a visual element or an additional body movement or other things in there. How do you know to put that all in at once at the beginning? Or do you accomplish one thing first and then add that in? You know, how do you know like how to break that down as well? You know, and so I think that's a really important element as well, because like you said, you were mentioning color guard, and now I'm thinking, you know, all the other elements that happen in place that aren't just drill. Like there's tons of other things. How do you know when to implement the small things that make a great idea?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a really great point, and I think I actually want to come back to that specific point at the very end of this episode and talk about how to pepper that in, because that's a really good point. I think that'll go well with some of the stuff we're doing at the end.
I guess I can wait that long, you know?
I'll keep you in suspense.
Yeah,
All right,
like,
cool.
I'll see you
A couple hours from now, you know?
You know how, oh geez, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. It's bad news. I've noticed, like, when I'm on Facebook, when they do their videos, I don't know, has anyone else noticed this? On Facebook, when you're watching a video, they tend to have, like, the lead up to the punchline, and then they stop, and then they go back to the beginning of the video, right? So, like, did you all see that, like, squirrel,
Yes.
oh my gosh, help me, what's the word?
Like obstacle course.
Obstacle course. I kept wanting to say scavenger hunt. I was like, that's not right. Have you seen that, Mike? The squirrel obstacle course?
Is it like the squirrel from Ice Age trying to get its like acorn?
Kind of. Yeah,
Okay,
like this dude.
That's the only thing I know of.
Well, this dude built this crazy like maze of tasks for these squirrels to get to this like mother lode of acorns, right? And it's insane. There's like a catapult that launches them into a safe net and like all these crazy things. Go look at it. But my point, because a lot of people have seen this, is this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, by the way. My point is they show like the squirrel launching off the catapult at the beginning, and you're like, what? And then they like go back to the beginning. They're like, so I set this thing up, and here's how I did it, and blah 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 blah. And then you got like a 9-minute video to get back to the point where the squirrel's getting launched by the catapult. So that's what we're doing now. So at the end, we're going to talk about how to no catapults, but in incorporating choreo. We'll talk about that at the end. Let me tell you what we are going to talk about as we get started here. I want to talk not about the entire process of, you know, how do we go from the beginning of nothing to where we are now. What I want to talk about are just some of the check marks, the checkpoints along the way, sort of what you were talking about, Mike. The checkpoints along the way that you should be sort of aiming for, and some of the things you can do at different parts of the season, depending on what your students already know. So we'll talk a little bit about the training aspect at the beginning, what you can do to dig deeper with your training for field awareness, for relationship with yard lines. We won't necessarily talk about relationship with each other today, but that is another big part of visual excellence as well. We'll talk about, for those of you who haven't utilized dot books before, what those are, what they look like, what some of the tools you can use are, and how they help. And then we'll talk a little bit about a band director's favorite thing, which is calculations. At the very end, when we talk about determining halfway points for sets and things that that maybe your students are struggling with. I know most music people like me are, maybe not most people, but I think many music folk aren't necessarily math people. Maybe that's just my my bias. I don't know.
It's funny because like half of us that work at MED are math music people, like math. Like I'm one of them.
Like Rebecca.
I like to nerd out to math things, so
It's true.
and I know Rebecca does.
Right.
I mean, her degree is in math, so
Right.
Degrees. Yeah.
Degrees, multiple. She's amazing.
Yeah. She's the real deal. Well, with that,
Let's get going.
let's jump into it. Number one, robust training. All right. So the ability to develop, I mean, there's some things that I think most people prioritize that are kind of surface level visual things, like your technique, right? What foot you start on, how to read drill. I think most people do a pretty good job of teaching how to read your coordinates. So what we're going to talk about is how to just communicate a little bit better, and also how to read the field a little bit better. In doing that, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
If I'm able. Oh my goodness.
You should be.
Yeah, I'm juggling all the things right now. So I'm going to show you a standardized version that I found online. I'm also going to put it in the show notes down below. But this is just one website that I found that's got great information on how to read the field and how to communicate it with your students. Can we see it?
Yeah. It's
Great.
beautiful.
Yeah. So this is on a website that I found, bentech.com. Just a simple search engine search and a few minutes of digging, and I found this, and I love it. So I've been in multiple rehearsals before. I'm going to jump back and forth between this screen and not this screen. I've been in multiple rehearsals before where a band director or the visual person will say, move up, right? You'll tell a student, move up. Well, if I tell the two of you to move up, what's your assumptions? Maybe you have the same assumption, maybe you don't, but what are your assumptions on where to move?
Up is forward from where I'm standing.
Okay.
So if you tell me to move up, I'm going, all right, cool.
Forward.
So I'm walking, if I'm standing here and the front sidelines in front of me, I'm moving up to the front sideline.
Okay.
If I didn't know anything about marching band or stage anything, I would assume up is come up towards me, like
Right.
Towards
Same.
the director.
yeah.
Right.
But up is, you think about upstage,
Right.
especially like in Winter Guard, you think up is upstage.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and for anybody who doesn't know, up actually comes from, I don't know if you all know this or not, but stages actually used to be very slanted. So before auditoriums kind of moved up like this, stages used to be tilted at an angle. So if you're the audience, the stage is tilted like this so you can see more of
So
it.
you can see.
So when people say move up stage, they're not saying come forward. They're actually saying move higher in elevation towards the back end of
that
the
finally
field.
explains to me that darn Houston Astros stadium when it has that big old rise in the back there of center field. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or not. I always wonder what the heck that thing was. There you go.
I do, yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to make an Astros joke, but it's just too easy.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
banging on a trash can.
right. Which is what they're probably in. All right.
On that note, one thing I do want to say is that's what up is. This is like, we're off the rails today. That's what up is to me. That's a very common vernacular in the world is up. But one thing I do want to say is you're the director, you're the person in charge. What matters more than the correct version of up is that there's a unified version of up in your program.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want up to mean move towards me, by all means, as long as you're in the same spot generally in a rehearsal, move up can mean move towards you, right? What matters is that you have a common vernacular that your students use. So this is the first thing that I would do. If we're communicating where you're at on the field, use some of these. Up, moving away from the home side viewpoint. So if this is where we are at the front of the field, right, and somebody's here near the 50, if only I had some annotation tools. Wow. If somebody's right here and you're right here, then telling them to move up is going to move them in a direction. Nope, not that way. Away from you.
Away from you. That's why I was in red first, to
Yes.
say no.
Away from you. And likewise, down, think about downstage, right? Towards the audience, down, right? Most programs that I've seen talk about this half of the field being side one, this half being side two, right? I've also heard side A, side B. I've heard that a lot as well. Typically the same thing. But again, if you were taught a different way, as long as your program is unified in what you're doing, by all means, that's what matters more, is really what I'm getting at. Like,
and one
unified
thing
language is
that
great.
helps is like, instead of even saying up and down, saying upfield and downfield.
Yeah.
Because when you say move up, like even now as a person who does this, like if someone said move up, I would move forward. But if someone said move upfield, I know where that is.
Right.
And that's really clear too, is making it more about the field.
Upfield, upstage. Yeah, absolutely. Just
One step in, one step out.
Right. Inside,
So-
outside, that's another one too. That's an important one.
So before you even do drill, say like you're a band,
Mhm.
you're a director, and you have your band in. It's one of the first days, maybe the first day of camp, and you're wanting to start. You're working on basics and whatnot on your visual program that's outside of drill, right?
Mhm.
And you're like, hey, I want to do this drill later on. I want to start setting some drill, learning how this works. Do you actually think would you recommend sitting down like in the band room with this on a projection and going through this kind of stuff first, like so you talk about it, or do you recommend like just going with it when you're on the field?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what I've done, and it's that. So in my actual in the programs that I was the visual caption head for, that was exactly what I did. I wish I had the slide. I could probably get it, but I had some slides I went through that explained up and down, side one, side two, and then inside and outside of yard lines. And then we would have we would actually do like at the end of the slides we would have the coordinate labeled, and we'd have students come up and like mark, like I was doing with the annotation. They would actually put an X on the field where that spot was.
So no physical activity there, just mental and discussion and
Yep.
and whatnot. And you found results with that?
I think so. I think what you're doing is you're just making sure that everybody has a good understanding of what they're supposed to be doing, and this is really good, especially as you're
Sure.
learning. As you're learning drill, but also just as you're continuing to clean it, right? If somebody's
Right.
marking off their dot and they're just, their step size is a little too big, a little too small, being able to communicate how they should adjust is super important. And I think even if you're in the, like, even if you've learned everything without doing this first, I think it's worth your time, like the next time you have rehearsal, to spend 30 minutes doing that. I had
Sure.
the very last the most recent time that I've done this with a program, I actually went outside and we played Simon Says. Simon Says go inside the 45-yard line on side two, right?
Cool.
And then they had a 10-second countdown to get there, and we were just trying to find the winner or whatever after we did 4 or 5 of those. Super fun. They love that, and it also just trains their brain to remember. Okay, I know my orientation with the field, right?
It took me a long time to figure out the difference between side one and side two. A long time. So
Yeah.
if somebody had done this with me, maybe I would be even better than
Yeah.
I am. I'm pretty awesome
yeah.
now. But like I didn't know side one and side two for a long time.
Sure.
So
Well, it's
how
just
about your kids?
it's just a good tool to get yourself in a better headspace for awareness, right?
It's just like, so you're basically saying it's just kind of like everything preparation. Like teachers prepare a lesson plan and outline. There's written things. I mean, before we're actually actively like, physically acting through it, we mentally prepare. And so you're saying that for success, it takes a little bit of upfront preparation, is essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
Yeah,
That's smart. It makes sense.
An hour of this, my estimation is an hour of this saves probably 10 hours of rehearsal time.
I was going to
over the
say,
course
because
of
a
one
lot of people, a lot of groups I observe or even work with,
season.
like a lot of times, like on a Thursday night, watching them, like it's very much like trial and error, experiential learning.
Yeah.
In many ways, whereas like there's benefits of that for sure,
Mhm.
but I do think that if you can streamline things and prepare people up front, that that generally doesn't hurt things. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's gonna help all your students. On that note, we'll also talk about training doing visual exercises, right? So just like a warm-up packet, like a good warm-up packet or whatever I call it a packet because it's music, but I was thinking about guard as well. Like a good warm-up routine, whatever it is super important, but you don't want to, we've talked about this in our videos in the past, that shouldn't be the only thing you do all year for your like warm-up preparation, right? Because if you do that, then there tends to be kind of a tendency for brains to shut off because they're just used to the routine, right? So I'm going to show you one example of something you can do to teach field orientation without changing up your warm-up routine very much. So let me pull up my Pieware here. I can never remember. Can you all see the real view when I pull it up?
Yeah, this looks awesome.
Yes.
Okay, great. This is my masterful craft of an 8x8 block. What we're going to do is an exercise that I was taught a long time ago that I still use called Donkey Kong, referred because of the way that Mario used to move side to side. So we're actually going to go this way. We're going to go down the field like this, right? And you'll see the performers are going to move forward 8. We're going to move over to the right 8. Usually I go left first, but what are you going to do? Forward 8,
good.
right 8. Yeah,
They're good.
it's impressive.
They're so good. I don't even see their feet lifting. Dang.
That's that SpongeBob. You want to see me run over there? You want to see me do it again?
So where's that? We need that SpongeBob theme.
So when we're setting up visual blocks, almost everybody does this. We have performers on the yard line. We have performers splitting the yard line. All right. This is a great way to work on orientation. You all know that if we do this, after 4 counts, the people that are halfway are going to end up where?
On the yard line.
On the line.
Yep. And the people on the line are going to end up
Halfway.
Ideally halfway.
right. Ideally halfway.
I say ideally because
You're not wrong.
right.
So one great way, so we're going to work on a million things with this exercise, right? You can probably work on not the whole gamut, but a huge range of skills through this one exercise. Transitions, halfway points, checkpoints, whether you're body center, foot center, whatever your strategies are. You can even talk about field orientation this way. But here's what I want to point out. If all we do is we take this block and push it somewhere else, let's push it 2 steps over. All right? We're going to push it 2 steps over. We're going to push the next set 2 steps over, right?
Sure.
So now we don't have people on or splitting. We have every single person
2 and 2.
2 and 2, right?
Yeah.
If we do that, this front line, when are they going to cross the line?
They're going to cross the line on beat 3.
Yes, right. They'll touch it. They'll touch it on 2. Yeah, that was bad wording on my part. They'll touch it on 2. They'll move it across it from 2 to 3. Yeah, yes. So what this does is it gives you the exact same orientation to each other, but it changes the orientation to the field, right? So now we're talking about clear path points and being aware of where we are in count 2, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. So it's the exact same exercise, so we can focus on make sure your technique's the same, but also be aware of how the field changes, right? And then once your students get good at this, change it up again, right? We can also put them on 1s and 3s.
Whoa.
So can I interject for a second?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I have found over the years is that you have a band going, on side 1 right now towards the 50, going towards side 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have them going forward. Ideally, like I see this and I imagine a forward march.
Mm-hmm.
But like one of the things I see that goes out the window a lot is keeping like if you're on the yard line and splitting, or if you're on 2s, that goes out the window a lot when you're on a reverse march or a backwards march.
Mm-hmm.
That people have a harder time figuring out how to adjust to the field when their body is going a different direction than like they're facing. Like I'm going this way, but I'm facing this way.
Yep.
So like on a forward march, what you're showing to me, like what I see is like I do this quite often. I see it works really well. Where I've suffered before in the past is being able to have that same kind of success on a backwards march and have people be able to have that kind of achievement. Is there any kind of tips or advice on that kind of thing?
So in the past, when I'm working on marching specifically, I use this exercise for, again, not everything. There's a lot of like 45-degree pathing, curve pathing. There's some things this exercise won't achieve, but you can modify this exercise to do I would say 80% of the range of skills that young performers need. Okay. So if I'm working with a group, I'll say, backwards Donkey Kong, forward slides. What that means is that they're going to start facing away, they'll move backwards 8, and then they'll do a forward slide to the left first, backwards, forward slide to the right. So basically I give them either I say Donkey Kong or reverse Donkey Kong, which means forward marching or backwards marching, and then I'll tell them forward slides or backward slides. So yeah, you can do the whole range with this particular exercise. That doesn't mean you have to, and it's good to change exercises throughout, but it's also a good way. One of the reasons I like doing the same thing over and over and over again is that they sort of get used to the comments that you're going to tell them throughout as they learn new permutations. Permutations. I don't know. English isn't
Permutations. Permutations are changed.
Yeah. Thank
and
you.
like, you know, like a big piece of it when you're doing all these versions of this exercise, there, you know, so we just have to teach them how to see, especially when like to talk about that backwards march thing. It's they don't know how to see because they're going backwards. Like it takes a lot of practice and skill and just teaching them how to get used to different references, like what it feels like to see a yard line go away from you and use that as your reference, but also being able to like use your peripheral vision a little bit better. I think both of those, like we're used to like walking forward and seeing the field come towards us, but as you're going backwards, you have to learn how to look at that. It's just like in color guard, people are afraid of 45 tosses on the left side because they just don't know how to look at it yet. Once you learn how to look at a toss, then it's not as scary and it's not as messy and crazy. You just have to learn how to look for it.
Yep.
And that's our job. Is to help
Well, it
them.
makes a lot of sense. Like, I think a lot of people do the visual side of this and they go, well, how does it feel? How does it feel? What does it feel like as opposed to like, what does it look like? And I think that like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. You know, one activity I remember doing when I was, I mean, this is back in 2004, but I remember doing like the block you just did, but every other person was facing a different way and they linked arms. And we marched like the group would march forward and everyone else would march backwards. And like, so you could kind of get the sense of a feel
Focus
for
on
a step
consistent
size. And like,
size.
and right. And I remember
Creative.
being young and being like, oh, that really, really helped me. And so, you know, so it's interesting. I wonder if sometimes, you know, we have our marchers look up at the ground a lot. I wonder if on a reverse march, when they're first being initiated or learning those things, if sometimes looking down would be helpful too for them. Sometimes to really see what's going on, because I think a lot of times on a backwards march, what a lot of people struggle with is understanding the parameters in which they're in.
Yep.
So yeah. Anyways, this is really cool.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I think in my experience, that's one of the great things that changing their orientation with the yard line changes. And just to share one more time, I want to move on to the next thing, but while I'm at it,
Why not?
You're able to see it, right?
Pinch out for a bigger view. There we go. We're good. We're good now.
So the only other thing as well, so the first time we did it, we were doing it across the field like this, right? But then also changing their orientation to do it this way as well is going to give them a completely different read of the field, right? So if we're doing forward, left, forward, right, they're seeing the field in a different way. They're seeing these long yard lines, right? So whenever they're crossing these yard lines, typically, especially when you're farther back, it's much easier to see these yard lines going side to side, right? It's a lot easier to get a read. So just another example of how to, even if you don't use that specific exercise, which of course you don't have to, being able to do something and then find different ways to do it. Right? Find different, you know, try it with them facing backfield, front field, side one, side two, because it's going to get them used to, even though I'm doing the same thing, some of my orientations are different and I need to be aware of that. And that's good for all types of students.
Right.
So that's part one.
Yeah.
Let's talk about number two. I debated putting this one first, but I decided to do it second because I think the robust training is the more important of these two. But if you feel good about your students' training, if you feel like you're giving them enough differentiation to get them to move on to some more training, being accountable for dot books is super important. And I want to talk a little bit about how to build a dot book, what they look like, some of the resources if it's a lot for you. And we can cover this one probably a little bit quicker because it's a little bit more of a tasky thing than an education thing. But we'll talk about how it kind of lines up. Have the two of you ever used dot books at all?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. So everybody does it a little bit different. I'm going to show you an example of UDB, Ultimate Drill Books, example of their dot book, which you can purchase, but I've never used their physical dot book. I've always like had students go to Walgreens and get the little like spiral bound note cards and do it themselves. So it doesn't have to be something that you purchase if that's not something you're interested in. So on UDB's website, they've got a couple examples of dot books. Here's one example. We'll talk about what's on it in a moment, but you'll see just tons of information on this one about, you know, what the form looks like, your relationship to the form, all this information. But ultimately what you really want, the most important thing I should say, is all this information right here. Am I able to zoom in? Doesn't seem like it. So let's talk about what this is. Things that you should have on your dot book once you get your information to your students, hopefully in the form of like a coordinate sheet. But drill can also work. The set number, right? So in this particular one, it's set 17. It's saying side to side, I'm 2 steps inside. The side one, 40, right? This is, again, a reason for good vernacular, right? 2 steps inside, side one, 40, right? Every single one of those is a piece of vernacular that's good for them to know. There's also like this particular chart says, hey, do I cross this with my foot? Do I touch my spot with my foot, or is it the center of my body that lines up on the spot? So it's a lot of information in this little tiny piece of set right here, right? To me, this is, it's kind of like having a reference for your music, sort of. The main difference is you don't necessarily learn. Some people don't necessarily learn their sets with a dot book. I know a lot of people like do the charting thing first as soon as they get the drill and then fill out the dot book. But I think, you know, it's important to have your music around as a reference. It's important to have something that you can reference for your spot. That's not just like a piece of paper that, like, if you sweat too much, all of a sudden it's destroyed.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, I think the big thing to think about is like, I think this is overlooked, and maybe I'm crazy, but like, I think a lot of directors print off coordinate sheets or the actual, like, you know, chart, the set, and they give it to them in like papers, and then like you're like, okay, hang on to this, and they put it in like a Hackman sack or something. Like, a lot of people wear Hackmans, and that's what I always did, and it's what I'm not opposed to Hackman sacks, but like, you know, put them in, and but like that loose stuff gets lost so quickly.
Right.
So like it's very a logistical thing. Like, set your students up for success by like making them have a bound index thing that's basically impossible to lose. Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, really, right?
I mean, I love dot books so much, and just like over the course of my marching band existence, the moment I learned about dot books, the more I was like, these are amazing. Because when I was in like high school, and basically all the way up until I started marching color guard, instead of having dot books, everyone would carry around binders, like 1-inch binders with the entire drill set, and be marching with the entire set of drill. And like dot books are like a whole binder, like 1 inch, like
flopping around on your hip.
It's like,
and there would be like
Like a seal.
my college did it for a long, I think they stopped, but like there would be like drill book explosions all the time because
right, that's what I'm saying. Like,
but you know, dot books are so portable, and Missy, the other color guard instructor I worked with at the U of A, we started laminating the coordinate sheets. Because like we didn't do dot books, but we did coordinate sheets, and oh my god, laminating them makes them last. It's beautiful, and they're so small.
Well, I think I think a lot of people underestimate the power of 1 or 2 hours of logistical preparation or like operational work behind the scenes. Like that stuff matters so much to everything, not just drill, but music and just everything. Like a couple hours spent up front doing work, it's kind of like you were saying when you present like how to read a field. A couple hours up front of work on the director's end or staff end to do those couple things really, really make a huge difference.
It's a tremendous benefit. And I'll say, I always feel like I have a lot of questions specifically about dot books. So let me just answer a couple of the things that I always get.
Cool.
Number one, I have a lot of, directors say, how do you get people to actually do dot books, right? A lot of people just don't do it. Like they'll buy the thing and then they'll just have it, but they won't really use it. They won't fill it out. I'll say if you have the ability, if it's part of a class, make it a quiz. Like, hey, give me your spot on chart 20. That's, one of your grades for the semester. That's an option that I've seen work. What's great, like, is that kind of like a forced enforcement once? Yes, but once people start to understand, like you mentioned, Holly, once people start to understand the value of a dot book, after you just really enforce it at the beginning, they start to understand the value, and then it just becomes a culture thing. And they see, I see the light, now everybody's going to do it because everyone's expected to do it.
Yeah. I was about to say, I think if the more you can do cultural things, I think the better. Like, it's always good to test people if you have to, but like, I have found that genuine change and progress doesn't happen from force, but usually happens from support and culture. So like, if you get your leadership on board to be like, this is what we do, like it'll trickle down enough to like within a year or so of starting it, it usually will be effective.
And it's also about, it's on the director as well to make sure that they're utilizing it. Where are you 100%. Supposed to be? Open up your dot book and make sure you know where you're supposed to be, right?
Right. It's 100% on the director. Yeah.
So like having like consequences if you don't have it. Like if you expect it to be at your rehearsal every single rehearsal, then what happens if somebody forgets it? If you just like let it go, then it's easy for them to like, oh well, I forgot it this time.
Right.
I have never been more angry than the rehearsals where 3 kids forgot their dot book and I had to help them learn their spots by, instead of fixing things as a staff member. So like the more it's just built in to the culture of rehearsal, like you have your equipment, you have your dot book and your water bottle. Like there's your stuff for rehearsal. Like that's just part of the checklist.
And the more people utilize it, the faster rehearsal will go, just from an efficiency standpoint, not from an urgency, but just people can do their job better, right? So you'll see that rehearsal starts to operate faster and faster. So if they don't have it, it's a little more noticeable because they are behind because they don't have one of the tools they need for rehearsal. So just stick to it at the beginning. I've seen all sorts of enforcement work. It's not necessarily a punitive thing. Well, it's not a punitive thing at all, but just make sure that you're emphasizing, hey, this is really important. This is part of who we are. I've seen some people just like paste the coordinate sheet onto a book and only use that. I don't necessarily recommend that either. Either have them write it out. That's good for your memorization anyway. It's good for you to get used to those things. Or this is, I swear there's not like an affiliate link or anything like that. I just really like UDB. They do offer their dot books. Your drill writer can actually import it to UDB and they can print these out for you directly. Or
that's cool.
You can actually use the app. They can import it to an app and then everybody can have it directly on their phone. And they're not going to lose those. So you can have your own drill book that way as well.
Yeah, they don't lose their phones, so you have to tell them to get off it half the time.
You hope they don't lose their phones.
I have a relevant story.
Oh no!
That I haven't even told Holly today.
Did you lose your phone?
I did. I was riding my bike to work, as I so often do, and I've typically got like an audiobook playing in my headphones, which are wireless, or like true wireless headphones. And I was riding, and then all of a sudden it said connection lost. It was just this morning. I was like, what? I like checked my pockets and it was gone. And somehow it had just fallen out of my pockets and directly onto the road this morning. And luckily, like, I go to work so early in the morning, like, it was fine. It was just laying in the road.
Good. I'm glad you got it back.
Maybe they won't always lose their phones or never lose their phones, but, you know, for the most part.
Your phone should go in your backpack now.
Nah. That's not me.
No.
You know, I've got a question for you. We're talking a lot about like things that set up our students for success, whether it's like starting a field and diagrams, and also like these questions or like different scenarios we've had with like a dot book, and like how dot books help, like these different like logistical things in many ways, right? Because like a student has no say in these things. Like if you're a director or staff and you say, we're going to learn drill by doing an hour of this and by having dot books, and we're going to have, like, that's just what you do. And maybe I'm jumping the gun, maybe you're coming to this, but like, were the same, I guess the same things would follow suit with like just rehearsal etiquette on the field, like stand by, check, stuff like those. Like, are we getting to those things here? Or?
I didn't, when I was building this, I wasn't necessarily thinking about etiquette things, so no. But I mean, to me, that's the roots of the tree, is making sure that, sort of like when you're training how to read the field, making sure that everybody knows the process for how you go through that. I mean, that's really like number one. When I was writing this, I was thinking kind of like, what are the next steps beyond that? But yeah, I mean, you're spot on. That's the stuff.
So like maybe in that session when you're teaching that, like being like, okay, when you're there, and like when you think you're there, like stand by, we're gonna have you check, we're gonna have you adjust, reset, stuff like that, and making that part of that conversation would be beneficial probably in that segment too, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I usually do them like slightly separate. Like we do the Simon Says thing, and then that would be the next thing as we're setting the drum, saying, hey, here's what we do. Let's go practice.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But essentially it's the exact same thing you're saying, just kind of next to each other instead of meshed.
The key here for folks listening is that we're not saying that you should do that as experiential learning. We're saying that should be a direct taught thing. Like you should spend time, half an hour spending those things is going to be way more important than 2 hours trying to remind them casually for a few weeks. So cool. I was just curious because like that's how I would approach it too. I was just wondering.
Yeah, 100%. I mean that stuff's so crucial to just being effective at everything you do. Just making sure they know the expectations between reps, during feedback. Yeah, that stuff's so important. So for sure.
Yeah, and the longer those things build over years, like, because when I first got to Desert Vista, like they talked a lot in between reps, and like as I pushed that more of like, we finish something, you're done, or like if I'm talking, you're not spinning.
Right.
Like it was hard to enforce at first, and now that I've been there for a few years, it's just part of the thing. Like I start talking and all of the returners stop spinning, so then all the rookies know to stop spinning too. So like, it's one of those things that it might be hard to do at first, but it builds up really, really well if you are consistent.
That's one of my notes for the end of the show. Absolutely. Like it's really cool to see a program, those first 3-4 years, it can be very, reinforcing the habits you want. But once the people know the expectation, they even continue to like deepen the understanding of the expectation for the new students. So there's like, the first 4 years, like all of a sudden you have your own people, but then like the next 4 years, you have your own people who were taught by your own people. And to me, that's when things are really, really cool. Like, you really get like both layers of things. I think that's the coolest. And you can just keep on going. Let's go to the last one. This is, again, just to kind of step out, like meta, talk about this show tonight. We've talked about robust training, which is, to me, the place to start. Just reinforcing dot books for excellence would be the next place. So this last one, while it's not the most important, I wanted to put it last because it's sort of the last one you should come to of these three. So let's talk about halfway points. All right. So let's say you're cleaning a show and you feel you feel great about the show, but you've got like, let's say a pass through that just is not working, right? Like they're getting to the right spot, but it just doesn't, it's not doing what it should be. So let's go back to Pieware. I'll actually go back to that same thing that I wrote earlier. So let's
Where
say
are the pies?
we've got, I've got nothing. I wish though. So let's say we've got a pass through. Let's say it's I'm gonna make this easy on myself. Okay. So let's say we've got this pass through, and we've got this half of people. Nope. Coming in from this way, 4, 8, 16. And the other group coming in from the other side, 4, 8, 12, 16, right? So we're going to mesh these two. Let's say it's not working. I did that backwards. Focus on calculating your halfway points, right? So we know, I guess I did this backwards. Okay, so it's a breakaway, whatever. So we're breaking away. We know this is where we start, and this is where we end, right? When we're learning drill for the first time, those are really the things we talk about, but the consistent path is important too. So 16 counts can be a lot for young marchers, people who are learning how to like move their feet and play their horns at the same time, or move their feet and playing in the battery. So break it down in half, right? Let's focus on, let's just take one person, right? This person. This person needs to figure out their halfway point. They start here, and they end here, right? So I'll ask the two of you, like, what's their step size? They're doing 16 counts, 16 steps and 16 counts. What's the step size?
It's 8 to 5, baby.
5.
Wow.
Yay. We passed
So
that.
take them 8 steps out.
Yep. So this is a simple version, but focus on that. So let's say this isn't a real set, right? This isn't a real set. It's 16. But what we're going to practice, because this set is tough, all right, emphasis, this isn't every single set of the show. This is one that we're not really succeeding at. We're going to figure out our math to figure out the halfway point, right? 16 count move. So we're looking at count 8, and we know that we move 16 8 to 5 steps over. 4, 8, 12, 16. So we're just going to cut it in half, 4 and 8, right? Simple enough. How about we do one a little bit more complicated?
Ooh.
Heck yeah.
I'm ready.
I'm totally making this up on the fly, but.
Well, then we are too.
Okay, we're going to focus on this person right here. Okay.
Okay.
We're going to do. Not exactly a gate, but kind of. We'll do a little rotation here. Back here. I've been riding at 4s all year because of COVID. Okay, so now in this first example, right, with our performer, it was pretty easy because we just had to calculate a side-to-side measurement, right? I move 16 8 to 5 steps over, so we're just going to divide that in half. But it can be done this way as well, right? So we're going to focus on our buddy right here. All right. So first, we're going to figure out how many steps horizontally did this person move.
6 steps.
Yep, 6 steps.
I was like,
I'm putting you all on the spot. Thanks for playing. I know you didn't expect to do math.
We did not sign up for drill math here.
But you're going to do it. Okay, so 6 steps side to side,
8.
and then 8 steps front to back, right? So now if we move 6 this way and 8 this way, all right, so what are we going to do? Where's our halfway point going to be?
Well, clearly half of 68, it's not
we're going to be over here.
34.
So that'll be
34
3 steps closer to the 35,
okay,
which is also 3 steps away from the 35, and 4 steps down.
Bingo. So
Man.
we've calculated our halfway point. If every single person on the field does this with their own spot, now this does require training and it does require like some kind of slow down effort, but we can figure it out, right? This person moved 2
Right.
steps over, 4 steps down. So at their halfway point, they're going to be 1 away inside the 35, right? They're going to be 2, well, they're going to be 2 farther down, which is really what, 4, 8, 12, 14 from the front. Hope I did that right.
Yep.
So yeah, and if you look on Pyware, because it's a straight line path, look, that's exactly where they are.
Right.
So, I mean, it's math that works, and you can see it in a visual representation.
Right.
Yeah. And like there's other ways you can help them visualize like either the halfway points or like big checkpoints, like on that big breakout move, helping them find when they hit the yard line, because that's a big, beautiful reference.
Right.
So like what count do you hit the yard line? What count do you hit the yard line again? Especially if they're not at even 4s.
Yeah.
Or, even 2s, but when they're at like 1s or 3s and all these odd numbers, helping them know, okay, my right foot hits the yard line on count 2, and they always know 1 hit, I'm there. Like,
Yeah.
So what other references can you give them that are tangible, especially if they're newer to the party? What's some stuff that you find intrinsic that might not be actually something that everyone just knows?
Right. Right.
Well, in many ways, this seems like the musician's equivalent of subdivision, right?
100%.
So like a quarter note and an eighth note, and from there, we've all had drill before where like we have, like almost, I mean, at least most of us, where you have like a general formation that goes into another one, but like 1 or 2 people have to do kind of a different, unique path to kind of get there to make room for someone passing through.
Sure.
So they're going like this way, then this way, then this way. Like they're changing up a little bit here and there. In many ways, I think that the way to get to that point of cleaning, that kind of preciseness is, or that kind of precision is by doing this first thing. Is like really teaching people how do you figure out the halfway point, because from there, if you have to break it into quarters, you could do that as well. You can subdivide it even more, just like music, right? I mean, is that
100%? Yeah.
cool?
Yeah, and that's a great thing to do. The way I see it is kind of you're both kind of orbiting everything that I believe about this, which is cool, because we haven't really talked about this particular thing at all. But I think it's great because it gives students a smaller target. Ultimately, that's the best thing about it. Holly, when you're talking about when they cross the yard line, maybe they cross the yard line on count 2, right? Well, if they are successfully doing that, right, but their straight line path isn't perfect, well, okay, but it's only imperfect for 2 counts instead of 16 counts, right? So you're making the target smaller. Yeah, Mike, when you're talking about subdivision, it's the same thing, right? What's cool about what you're saying with quarters and things is that we all know that, band students, like especially for whatever reasons, there's something in the water that flute players drink, and they tend to be very bright people and ambitious people. And that can be true for other sections too. I'm just picking on flute players. But they'll go and do those things on their own. So make sure that you're not doing this. Well, I would be surprised if you can the first time you're doing this. When you're teaching this to your students, do it with your toughest set. Do it with your toughest 3 sets, right? And make sure that you turn a 16 count move. Now you're turning it into 2 8 count moves, right? And that's great for your students because it gives them a smaller target to hit. But also you're going to have those bright students who can just do it with the rest of the show. They're like, this is really great. This helps me out a lot. Now they're taking a show that's got, 80 to 90 sets. And for them, it's going to be a 200 or 150 set show because they're going to do it with a whole bunch of their sets. And that's great for them as well. It's good for their development as a person, as an ambitious student, and as obviously as a performing member too, which is great for you.
Yeah, and using the this halfway point doesn't have to be a big involved process
Right.
every time. Like you do it with a simple set towards the beginning and like just help them understand the basic concept of like, if it takes me 16 counts to get here, there's going to be a point where the halfway point is if I'm being consistent all the way. And just like dropping that concept in will help those of them who are ready to start learning more on their own and like having more mental processes going while they're marching,
Yeah.
that's just like, that's enough to get some of those kids going. And then, you know, making it a big rehearsal point one day for that really tough set is another option of working on halfway points. It doesn't have to be the same
Sure.
like process to get to the halfway point concept.
Sure.
Well, and I think you can tie this in musically in many ways. Like 8 steps is like an 8 to 5, right? We go from 5 yards to 5 yards. Like it's 8 steps. Like in many ways, I think that there's a benefit. Like eighth note is a whole note. So like associating 8 steps with 8 notes with a count with like a whole note, or 4 steps with 4 eighth notes with a half note, or 2 with a quarter note. Like I think that those things, like musically, like sometimes you have students who are really, really good musically but struggle visually.
Yeah.
And I think that there's ways you can segue like the musical element and what you're doing with visuals with the counts, because it just happens to line up with 8s, which is very common for phrasing and just counting.
Yeah.
Whereas like you could say whole notes are going to be on the 8s and half notes are going to be on the 4, and we're going to like work on these parameters that could really be beneficial as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, your tone kind of went up at the end, so I thought there was more. But yes, I fully
As
agree.
well. And I also
You're like,
think
as well.
no.
Okay. No, you're good. This is great. I love this. I mean, I love this stuff in general. I want to emphasize this. I know I've already said it, but you know, just prioritize the sets you need this for. You know, don't go into your first season doing this thinking we need to do halfway points for every single set.
Right.
No way.
So, yeah. Well, that's that. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to go over today. It's not everything, but I'm thinking like whenever you're done, you know, learning the show, if you haven't achieved these things, this is the order I would go in. I would make sure that you have your common vernacular. Make sure your students have a deeper understanding of the field than they already do. Reinforce dot books, make it part of your culture. That's probably a multi-year thing, but invest in it because it's going to save you time for the rest of your career. And then halfway points, right? Making sure that you're making smaller and smaller chunks of the show to help your students aim a little bit closer to their target every single time, and you're gonna get just a little bit more excellence out of. You're going to get a lot more excellence out of just a little bit of effort in some small areas.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to a bigger picture. You know, we talk about design details. Like details are the things that make something coherent and really great. So if you're just trying to get like a really cohesive product, like focus on the things that really matter. Makes a lot of sense.
Well said. Some final notes as we go through this, just some other things that I wanted to add in here, but we didn't have enough time for, and also didn't necessarily fit into this category. The field isn't perfect, so if you've got a discrepancy in your show and people are marking off from the front sideline and the front hash, that's not exactly perfect. So make sure that you prioritize, hey, this set is farther backfield, so we're going to go off of the hash, so adjust as needed. Make sure that you're starting this process early. Right? Even though we're talking about things that happen later in the season, make sure that you're starting this process early in the year, that you're not starting at like mid-October. You should probably already have some of these foundational things going.
Especially if it was a regular year where you started in July.
Right.
Some of us haven't, like, we've done our second rehearsal, so like everyone's in a different place this year.
Yeah, it's a notoriously frustrating weirdo year, but
what are you gonna do?
Well, I'll tell you what I would do. I would be really doubling down on these kinds of things right now. Like there's not a better time. You know, there's not a better time.
Well, I agree. It's what we've been talking about with my band staff and just in general and the students is like there is no excuse at fall of 21, assuming hopefully the things are a little bit back to normal.
Right.
Like there is no excuse we're not more prepared.
Right.
Logistically, educationally, mentally, all across, maybe not physically, but all across the board. like I'm going to went to people during COVID. The quarantine, 50. But like,
slowly
like,
turning into up people.
Yeah, right. Like, I'm not gonna give us the whole physical thing.
Not
It's
up,
just too
Wally.
Wally.
Wally
like,
people.
yeah, right. Like all the other aspects, like there's no excuse we're not. Like there's a little bit more time for most people in some ways, and like there's no excuse not to become very prepared for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, yeah, I mean, during this time, like I've heard from a lot of people that this is either a wasted year or that it's a building year or whatnot. And I just fundamentally disagree with it. I think that it is 100% like the focus that you can put towards things to make things better in the future. So like, you got to make the best of what's going on for sure right now. And like,
yeah,
prep, work, have a vision and like prep for the future. Like
man.
This is the time. Yeah, right. This is the time.
It's like Rage Against the Machine said, what better place than here? What better time than now?
Right. Right. They said a lot of other things, so we won't play those.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of a few. To get all the way back, this is my squirrel launching on the catapult moment. To get all the way back to where we were at the beginning, go watch. I'm going to send it to you once we're done.
I will watch.
You have to watch. It's really cool.
I will.
We'll probably link it in the chat, so if you didn't get to see it, you can see it too.
It's worth your time. It's well worth your time. Incorporating choreography. Man, we could do a whole new show on this. Like we could just go on intermission and go into the whole new thing. I would say that building the skills in tandem with each other is crucial. So focusing on the skills, if you're doing, some level of choreography, whether it's, your first time doing choreography with a group or it's deeply ingrained in what you do, train these skills alongside it. But I would say that for the most part, they're separate skills to start. But just like with the Donkey Kong exercise, that's something else I've done. I kind of use that instead of box drill, although I use box drill as well for some other things. But anyway, you can do forward 8, left 8, and then pick up some body for 8. Forward 8, right 8, body for 8. Forward, left, forward, body for 8. Right, forward, left, body for 8. You could do all sorts of stuff with that. But training those skills separate and then bringing them together is great. As far as when to put those things in, Mike, I would just say it depends on who's doing it.
It makes a big difference. Like the sequence because that's exactly what color guard does. Like color guard doesn't do anything other than that because we have drill and we have choreography. There's no other element, but we usually learn the drill and we learn the choreography, and part of learning the drill is then putting the choreography into place because the drill changes as soon as your feet change. So if you have a turn in there, you aren't going to travel the same as you would if you were taking 8 steps in a standard like marching pattern. Like my brain stopped for banned words, but like if the choreography changes how far you can travel with a certain move, it needs to get put into that sequence. So learn the pathway, learn the steps, but then get the choreography in there once people know where they're going.
Right. It depends on the context of the choreography too. It also depends pretty deeply on who's doing it. If you've got somebody coming in to do it, like I don't always love doing this, but if you've got somebody coming in for band camp, like learn that stuff quick, make sure there's video of it so you can continue to clean it throughout the year. But if it's me doing it, or if there's somebody that's on staff full time that's doing the choreography, I would say just hold off as you're continuing to build those skills. It really depends on what your program is, who's doing those things, and if you have questions about it, those of you watching, then you can email us.
Facebook message us, anything.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Info at Music Effect Design is a great place to get us. If you've got questions about how to implement it, we can see what we can do to help.
Yep.
And that's the show.
Cool.
That was
great.
Yeah,
I learned a lot just talking about visual elements.
I mean, I love this stuff. I love band. I've got a serious
that's why we're here.
itch for it. Yeah.
Band's pretty cool.
It's all right. It's okay.
Yeah, it was okay.
Hey, for those of you that were watching today, thank you as always. If it's your first time, we're here every Friday, 7 o'clock. We're here. We're doing our thing. We'll be here again next week with some more great info. And until then, have a great week, and we will see you on Friday.
Take care.
Bye.